What's up, everybody? This is Caesar coming straight from the underground where we're innovating. And why are we innovating? Because we're closest to the problem and stand to benefit significantly from obtaining a solution to that problem. And what's our problem? Trying to validate business ideas in resource constrained environments. And boy, today I got a good one for you. So I've been thinking about a few different things when it comes to innovations and how innovation truly happens at the edges and under constraints. And this is a whole thesis of this particular channel is really trying to generate better ideas in order to be able to validate business models. So one of the ones that I've put together for you is called the underground startup. How can we get to that business model validation, that data-driven decision easier and quicker? And in the following videos that I'm going to be putting out, it's really going to go into depth how we can utilize structure and identify pain points from target customers utilizing tools like AI or advanced methodologies. And today I'm going to compare the lean startup methodology, an old, outdated methodology, in my opinion, that really is high risks and leads to a point where of no return for some particular startups. So, how do we innovate? Well, today we're going to find out about that and stay tuned, and we're going to go ahead and get into it. All right. So, on the screen right now, I went ahead and outlined a few different processes. Now, what I really want to challenge is the traditional method of startup development where it takes a customer discovery first approach and then moves it into some sort of MVP hypothesis in order to be able to find product market fit. And here in front of you, I've went ahead and outlined the traditional method, which is called the lean startup. Now, for those that are not familiar with the lean startup, it was developed by Eric Ries in 2000, early 2010s. Now, this was developed in a reaction to taking a traditional product development approach, which was very resource intensive and didn't take the consideration of the market and users in need. And thus, taking that approach really led to wasteful product development outcomes. And it really expanded the risk of finding that nobody wanted to buy your product. So the true innovation here was including a customer discovery process. And that's initially where this particular process starts is by taking that first step by going out of the building and talking to people. So this particular method also was developed in a very different environment that we're experiencing today. VC capital was abundant. Essentially, we were coming off of that dot com bubble. So if you had a dot com name in your company, you were automatically given funding in some cases. And it was also developed in a very closed environment out in Silicon Valley. And today, things have changed. We're not in a resource abundant environment. VC funding isn't as abundant. We have tools like artificial intelligence, which has really changed the game. And I'm going to go into that whenever it comes to presenting the underground startup methodology. So, in this particular approach, it was a product first approach where you would build the product and then get market acceptance later. So as you can see here, I've went ahead and outlined the phases. So phase one was problem definition and hypothesis formulation, which is still a very strong starting point with any methodology or any startup that you create. It's essential that you understand who your target group is and what their pain points are. Now, where this approach used to be able to validate was they identified the problem and the market opportunity. This could either come from an experience that you had, it could have come in the form of working in a specific market where you saw the opportunity, or just by pure observation. Then you would go into customer discovery and interviews. This is where you would reach out to people that fit that problem. And then you would conduct customer interviews and do a needs analysis in order to be able to frame that business hypothesis, that MVP hypothesis, and to frame the pain point. After that, like I mentioned, you would develop your MVP hypothesis, and then you would move to phase two, which is MVP development and testing. Now, in previous videos, I've talked about some of the pitfalls whenever it comes to moving straight to building. Now, in a resource constrained environment, that is a very, very high risk move, especially if you haven't developed your target market. If you don't have anybody paying for your particular business or service, moving to building is high risk, very, very low reward. And this is where this product first approach really derails startups because it really puts a lot of risk on them up front, which can lead to disastrous results. So, building first, any engineering effort is a very high risk move. And I wouldn't recommend that. And that's one of the limitations and flaws of this particular method. So, you would go to build your MVP, and then the MVP would be tested with early adopters. Now, granted, you've been maintaining relationships with the people here first and then moving towards getting them to test with you. That's the whole thesis of the lean startup methodology, is putting something out quick and then molding it essentially to finding that product market fit. Now, after that, as I mentioned, you would iterate, analyze the customer feedback metrics, pivot or preserve decisions, and then start scaling the business. This is very, very ideal. And for the time that it was developed in, it was working. It was just a reflection of what businesses were doing in order to be able to find success. Now, like I mentioned, there's limitations to this specific methodology. Although it was meant to de-risk and essentially lower the amount of resources placed into developing a startup, nowadays it's very high risk and very resource intensive. Now, where are the risks associated with this particular methodology? Well, let's go ahead and take a look back at this problem definition and hypothesis formulation. The major risk comes with customer discovery and interviews. Not only is that resource intensive, because essentially you have to bother people from their everyday experiences in order to be able to get their attention and give you valuable information or even sit down on a 10-minute interview. Anybody that's gone through a customer discovery phase, whether they're working in a business, doing product development, an entrepreneur, or anybody in that particular field, knows that this is very grueling and very resource intensive. And not only that, as a first time entrepreneur, if you don't know how to conduct these interviews properly, then you can get very mixed results and really build your MVP off of a false positive, some sort of assumption. Now, this is where a lot of the risk is taken on, because if you don't get a good amount of data here in these initial customer interviews, then essentially you're off to a bad start already, and your risk of failure increases tremendously. Now, as I mentioned, another limitation here is moving to that second phase, which is that MVP development. So if you've already conducted interviews that have given you the wrong pain points, the wrong requirements, and all of that, you're building something that nobody wants. So you've already placed your hypothesis off of false information and you're moving to a very risky phase, which is building, especially if you've got the requirements incorrect. You have not validated the pain point or the value prop. You're setting yourself up for failure. And then third, there's no move to developing the market, essentially. So one of the biggest limitations, especially as a first time entrepreneur and coming from a technical background, essentially you read these methodologies and they tell you to build. That's a very comfortable space to be. You have an idea and you build, and then you figure it out later. The market will accept it. Even if you do define the requirements correctly, if you follow this methodology, the product first approach, there's nobody at the end, right? You have to come back and you have to develop the marketing. Now, that isn't explicitly clear in the lean startup. In my own opinion, when I was reading it, I was soaking up that information, but one of the things always fell short. It's like, well, how do we get customers, right? It just tells you how to build a product that people may like or solve a problem. That is the limitation of the lean startup methodology. And because of that, something new has to be created, right? So the product first approach serves its time. If you're in a resource abundant environment, you have the time to be able to go and talk to customers. You have the luxury of being able to build something. Then it is a really great approach to be able to build a product. But if to validate product market fit, this is a terrible way of doing it. And that's what the underground innovators whole thesis is about, bucking traditional trends, trying to figure out what works, because there's nothing more frustrating than trying to get something to work for all my engineers out there, but that giving an approach that just is outdated is even more frustrating. So that's where we're innovating. That's where the underground comes in. And so, with that being said, as I mentioned, I've developed a different approach, which is more along the lines of a marketing first approach. And I'm going to go ahead and go into details about this as to why it bucks traditional methodologies. And here in today's age, whenever it comes to the world of artificial intelligence, speed to market, really validating ideas, low constraints, really putting very low resources into getting out maximum return, I truly believe that this is the ideal methodology, especially for first time entrepreneurs. So let's go ahead and take a look. As I mentioned, this is an underground startup coming from the bottom, trying to figure it out, trying to really get into the game, and really trying to get to a data driven decision. Now, this is where things differ from the lean startup methodology. It takes a completely different approach to customer discovery. Now, like I mentioned, we all have to start with some sort of observation, some sort of hypothesis, right? And this particular process starts with exactly that. We have to really define our pain points. That is so important in order to be able to start building anything or start building any sort of business. So, in this particular phase, we're defining our pain points. Now, I'm a big fan of the business model canvas. I still believe that is a very solid tool whenever it comes to starting your own business, because it helps you organize ideas and really helps you validate things as you go along. In this particular phase, I would start off with the business model canvas. And just to caveat that, I'm going to go into way more detail. This is a high level view of the actual process. But in the pain point definition, you essentially build out that business model canvas. You define your pain points, your MVP hypothesis, and then here's where things different. We pull a jujitsu move here, right? We can use artificial intelligence in order to be able to speed up the validation process. Whereas the traditional approach told you to get out of the building and start talking to people. Here in this pain point definition, using a finely tuned large language model, aka a custom GPT, and a data set from scraping data from forums, product reviews, comments in a structured, organized way, you can have the large language model do a lot of the validation early on and to be able to define your pain point in a very high accurate way, and then go start moving towards uh, defining that particular value prop as well. So, like I mentioned, I'll get into more tactics as far as how you can implement artificial intelligence into this workflow. But that's one of the biggest differences from having to go talk to people outside of the building, which can be resource intensive. You're still going to have to build a list or something like that. It can be skewed. There's a lot of risk associated with talking to individuals because they may just be uh, letting you know what you want to hear. Whereas if you get data from a particular source, it's well structured, it's uh, credible, you run it through a large language model, it gives you a head start. It helps you get to that particular point quicker and with more accuracy. And like I mentioned, that is one of the biggest things about pain point definition is just coming up with a hypothesis. Now, the second part is really starting to move towards something where it's actionable, building out a funnel. Where are you setting up your paid ads? Where your customers are? Is it LinkedIn, Instagram? Is it Facebook? Where are you going to land them to? Really thinking through that funnel and then connecting a CRM in order to be able to start tracking all that information. You want, after this pain point definition phase, you should have a pain point, you should have some sort of idea for a solution, and you should have some sort of value proposition. Now, this is where things differ. Instead of building an MVP, we in this particular approach, we're utilizing lead magnets. Lead magnets essentially attract qualified potential customers into your funnel and your workflow, and you deliver some level of value in order to be able to get something back. And this is where this is critical, because in that particular funnel and that value prop definition, you can offer something of value in order to be able to get real user feedback. And that's where things differ from the traditional model. You're getting that in real time. And instead of building an MVP, you're utilizing a lead magnet. And that lead magnet could essentially inform your product decisions down the road, right? So you can offer some scaled back version of a feature set to see if that pain and that solution is good enough for the user, and be able to move in to a more steady, low risk development environment. So funnel value prop definition allows you to be able to start designing how you're going to get users in order to be able to build a list. Two, what is your messaging? And then three, some sort of early lead magnet in order to be able to validate your pain points, validate your solution, and validate your value proposition, which is the third phase. Now, right off the bat, you're really condensing that amount of time that it would take, and you're really increasing the accuracy from that. In this phase, you'll start running paid ads to some sort of centralized landing page, really vetting that specific lead magnet and really getting real time data in order to be able to inform your next decision, whether you continue that business model or you continue to iterate, because now you have actual data. And like I mentioned, you can utilize large language models in order to be able to sift through all that data and start iterating on a solution, something of more value, in order to be able to start attracting potential customers and users. So that's where the true innovation comes in, is really getting marketing insights early on, utilizing artificial intelligence and lead magnets versus the traditional customer discovery of really going out, talking to people, and then building an MVP, wasting all those resources and hoping that somebody's going to use it. Well, right off the bat here, we know that people are going to be using it because they're starting to engage with what we're putting out. Now, phase four is essentially continuing to build that list, right? And then sorting people out through intent, and also taking the data that you've gotten from the lead magnet in order to be able to refine a new offering. Fifth step is essentially conducting some sort of personalized outreach, whether it's through email, phone, LinkedIn messaging, whatever your particular way of outreach towards that specific customer is ideal. That's where you would do it. And then lastly, move to sell. Move to sell is essentially trying to get them to swipe their credit card. That's where all this methodology really points to, is, can you get a paid customer? Well, this is the quickest way and the most validated way of being able to do that. Now, once you get that customer, then you can move to a more traditional product development process, really outline your product roadmap, your feature set, and all of that stuff as well. So, like I mentioned, this starts with an assumption, and then as the process goes forward, you start de-risking with real world insights from the market, so that way you can pivot quickly. Now, what's better, paying $500 for ads or paying $5,000 to build a solution that nobody wants. And this is my whole argument, like I mentioned, is that taking a marketing first approach not only allows you to be able to start building that list of potential users, but you're already offering value early on whenever you start using this approach through the utilization of lead magnets. And then early on, you're really expediting that that customer discovery process by utilizing large language models and being able to take large data sets and get a really solid foundation. Now, in these next videos, I'm going to go into more detail about tactics that you can use. And then I'm going to show you a few different custom GPTs that I've put together in order to be able to do things, what documents that you need to be tracking, how to structure one of these projects, and going into more detail about how you can complete this. So if this is useful, let me know in the comments. Are you guys still using the lean startup methodology? Do you guys use lead magnets in validating your product market fit? Let me know. Like I mentioned, this is, in my opinion, the quickest way in order to be able to validate a business idea. So, with that being said, you guys keep innovating, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.